The train whistle pierced the evening air like a scream as Prudence Davis clutched her 6-month-old daughter tighter against her chest. Silver Falls, Wyoming Territory, 1878, the final stop on a journey that had already cost her everything but the child in her arms. The platform was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers collecting luggage, while Prudence stood alone, her borrowed shawl doing little against the October chill. Harold Jenkins, the man who'd promised her marriage and security in his letters, was nowhere to be found. "Last call for passengers to Cheyenne," the conductor shouted, eyeing Prudence with something between pity and impatience. "Madam, you disembarking here or continuing on? I'm waiting for someone," Prudence managed, bouncing little Emma to keep her quiet. The baby, sensing her mother's distress, began to whimper. The station master approached, an elderly man with kind eyes that had seen this scene before. "Been waitin' long, miss. My fiancé was to meet me, Harold Jenkins." The name felt hollow on her lips. The station master's face fell. "Jenkins? Oh, miss." He removed his hat. "Harold Jenkins left town near 3 weeks ago, gambling debts, word as he headed for California." The world seemed to tilt beneath Prudence's feet. She'd sold everything she owned to make this journey from Boston, her deceased parents' furniture, her mother's silver, even her teaching books. All she had left were $2.63, a small carpet bag of clothes, and the hungry child in her arms. "Is there a hotel?" she asked, hating how her voice trembled. The silver spur, but the station master looked at her threadbare coat, the baby, then at her face. "It's $3 a night." The platform had emptied completely now, save for a tall figure leading a chestnut mare toward the station. Ethan Garrett had come to town for supplies, not to witness a woman's desperation, but something about her dignified posture, despite her obvious predicament, caught his attention. "Problem here, Joe?" Ethan asked, addressing the station master while his eyes remained on the young woman. She couldn't have been more than 22, with auburn hair escaping her simple bonnet and eyes that, though rimmed with exhaustion, held a stubborn determination. "Jenkins' bride," Joe replied quietly. "Seems he's left her high and dry." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd never had much use for Jenkins, a boastful, slippery man who'd once tried to swindle him on a cattle deal. The woman looked up, catching his stare, and quickly averted her eyes, pride evident in her straight spine despite the baby starting to cry in earnest now. "Miss," Ethan said, stepping closer, "I don't mean to intrude, but it's getting dark. You need somewhere to stay." "I'll manage, thank you," she answered, but her voice wavered as the baby's cries grew louder. "Your little one's hungry," Ethan observed. "Emma's fine," Prudence insisted, though the child's wails suggested otherwise. Ethan glanced at the darkening sky. October nights in Wyoming were no place for a woman and infant with nowhere to go. He'd seen enough tragedy in his 30 years. "I own the Rocking G Ranch about 5 miles outside town," he said. "Got a housekeeper there, Mrs. Winters, proper lady who'd be happy for female company." He paused, seeing distrust flash in her eyes. "I'm not offering charity, madam. Ranch needs help cooking, mending, that sort of thing." "Baby's welcome too." "I don't know you, sir," Prudence replied, though her arms ached from holding Emma and her stomach growled audibly. "Ethan Garrett," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Ask anyone in Silver Falls about me." He turned to Joe. "Station master here has known me since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." Joe nodded. "Ethan's good people, miss. His ranch is respectable, has the best water rights in the county." Prudence looked from Emma's tear-streaked face to Ethan's steady gaze. His eyes were clear blue beneath the brim of his hat, his face weathered but honest. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way Harold had been in the photograph he'd sent, but there was something reassuring in his steady presence. "I'll take you both as my own," Ethan said quietly, and then, perhaps realizing how his words might sound, quickly added, "As my responsibility, I mean, until you figure out your next steps." The baby's cries grew more insistent. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Garrett," Prudence finally said. "And I was a teacher back east. I can earn my keep." Ethan nodded, relief crossing his features. "Horse can carry you both. I'll walk alongside." 10 minutes later, Prudence found herself perched side-saddle on Ethan's mare, Emma finally quieted against her chest, while Ethan walked steadily beside them. leading the horse through the dusty main street of Silver Falls. She felt the curious stares of townspeople as they passed the mercantile, the saloon, a small church. What must they think of her? Another abandoned mail-order bride, foolish enough to travel across the country for a man she'd never met. "You don't have to explain anything to anybody," Ethan said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Folks here mind their business, mostly." "He wrote such beautiful letters," Prudence said suddenly, needing to explain herself to this stranger who was showing her more kindness than she deserved. Described his home, his dreams, said he wanted a family. Ethan's expression darkened. Jenkins was always good with words, not so much with truth. "Emma isn't his," she blurted out, then felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I mean, I was married before. My husband died of influenza last winter, shortly after Emma was born. I didn't mislead Mr. Jenkins, he knew about her." Ethan's expression softened. "Madam Mrs. Davis, is it? You don't owe me explanations." "Miss Davis," she corrected. "I kept my name after James died." She paused. "And it's Prudence." As they left the town behind, the vastness of the Wyoming landscape opened before them. Rolling hills gave way to distant mountains, the last rays of sunset painting them gold and purple. Despite her circumstances, Prudence couldn't help but marvel at the wild beauty so different from Boston's crowded streets. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Ethan agreed. "Harsh sometimes, but honest. Land doesn't lie to you." The double meaning wasn't lost on Prudence. "I should have been more cautious," she admitted. "My parents would be mortified to see me now." "Sometimes good people make desperate choices," Ethan said. "No shame in wanting security for your child." They crested a small hill and Ethan pointed ahead. Rocking G. "Not much to look at, but it's home." The ranch house was larger than Prudence had expected, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch and several outbuildings scattered around it. Lamplight glowed from the windows and smoke curled from the chimney. Several horses nickered from a corral nearby, and a dog bounded up to greet them, barking enthusiastically. "Quiet, Scout," Ethan commanded, and the border collie immediately sat, though his tail continued to thump against the dirt. The front door opened, and an older woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ethan Garrett, you're late for supper again," she called, then stopped when she spotted Prudence and Emma. "Oh, we have company." "Mrs. Winters," Ethan said, helping Prudence dismount with careful hands at her waist. "This is Miss Prudence Davis and her daughter Emma. They'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Winters' shrewd eyes took in the situation quickly. "Jenkins' bride?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded once. The housekeeper's face softened. "Well, you're welcome here, dear. Come inside before that little one catches cold. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread." Prudence felt tears threatening. "Thank you," she managed. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Mrs. Winters said, taking Prudence's carpetbag from Ethan. "Any friend of Ethan's is welcome at the Rocking G. Besides, I've been telling him for years this place needs a woman's touch beyond what these old hands can provide." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. A large fireplace dominated the main room, with well-worn but clean furniture arranged around it. Bookshelves lined one wall, unexpected in a cowboy's home, and the dining table was already set for supper. "I'll show you to your room after you've eaten," Mrs. Winters said. "There's a cradle up there belonged to Ethan's sister's boy when they visited last summer. I couldn't ask for more," Prudence said, overwhelmed by the kindness. "You didn't ask," Ethan reminded her, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "I offered." 30 minutes later, with Emma fed, changed, and sleeping peacefully in the borrowed cradle, Prudence sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of hearty beef stew before her. Mrs. Winters had tactfully retired to her own quarters in a small attached dwelling behind the kitchen, leaving Prudence alone with her unexpected benefactor. "There's something you should know," Ethan said, breaking a long silence. "I'm not looking for a wife." Prudence nearly choked on her stew. "I beg your pardon, just wanted to be clear," he continued, his ears reddening slightly. "Some might think I brought you here with expectations. I didn't. You need help, I need help around the ranch. Simple arrangement." "Mr. Garrett," Prudence said, finding her voice, I assure you, marriage is the furthest thing from my mind right now. I've had quite enough of men's promises to last a lifetime. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. Fair enough. I won't stay longer than necessary, she added. As soon as I earn enough for train fare, no rush, Ethan interrupted. Winter's coming. Not a good time to travel with a little one anyway. He stood, carrying his empty bowl to the wash basin. Besides, Mrs. Winters likes having you here already. She's been after me to hire help. What exactly would my duties be? Prudence asked, practical despite her exhaustion. Cooking when Mrs. Winters is busy with other things, mending, maybe keeping the books. I'm not much for numbers. He paused. And come spring, if you're still here, maybe some gardening. Ranch used to have a fine kitchen garden when my mother was alive. Something in his tone when he mentioned his mother made Prudence look up. There was a flicker of old pain there, quickly masked. I'd be happy to help with all of that, she said. I'm a fair cook, excellent with needle and thread, and I taught arithmetic back in Boston. Ethan nodded. We'll start tomorrow. Tonight you rest. He headed for the door. I sleep in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands, more comfortable for everyone that way. Mr. Garrett, Prudence called as he reached for his hat. Thank you. Not many would have done what you did today. He paused, hat in hand. Call me Ethan, and you're wrong about that. Any decent man would have done the same. Then there must not be many decent men left in the world, she replied softly. Ethan's eyes met hers across the room. Maybe you've just been looking in the wrong places. With that, he settled his hat on his head and stepped out into the night, leaving Prudence alone with her thoughts and a sleeping baby in a stranger's home. Morning came with a brilliant sunrise that painted the distant mountains gold. Prudence woke to Emma's soft babbling and the unfamiliar sounds of a working ranchmen's voices calling to each other, horses nickering, the clank of metal tools. For a moment, disorientation gripped her before yesterday's events came rushing back. She rose quickly, changed and fed Emma, and dressed them both in the cleanest clothes she had left. Her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin showed a tired woman with auburn hair escaping its pins and worried eyes, but she straightened her shoulders. She would not be a burden. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Winters already busy at the stove. The older woman turned with a smile that crinkled her eyes. Good morning, dear. I was about to bring you up some breakfast. The men have already eaten and gone out to work. I should have been up earlier to help, Prudence said, settling Emma on her hip. Nonsense, you needed rest. Mrs. Winters reached for the baby. May I? It's been years since I held one this small. Prudence handed Emma over, surprised at how naturally the housekeeper cradled her daughter, cooing softly. You have children, a shadow passed over Mrs. Winters' face. Had 2 boys, lost them and my husband in a fire 20 years ago. She smiled down at Emma. But that's old sorrow. Now, let me show you around while this little one keeps me company. Over the next hour, Prudence received a thorough tour of the ranch house, the kitchen with its large wood stove, the pantry stocked with preserves and dried goods, the dining room where the ranch hands ate their meals, the sitting room with its unexpected library of books. Ethan's mother was a great reader, Mrs. Winters explained. Started the collection and he's added to it over the years. Man reads more than anyone I know. It's impressive, Prudence admitted, running her fingers along leather-bound spines. I wouldn't have expected. A cowboy to be educated, Mrs. Winters chuckled. Ethan went to school back east for 2 years. Would have finished if his father hadn't died, forcing him to come home and take over the ranch. Outside, Mrs. Winters showed her the kitchen garden, now mostly harvested for winter, the chicken coop and the wash house. In the distance, Prudence could see men on horseback moving cattle across a hillside. She thought she recognized Ethan's tall figure among them. Ranch has prospered under him, Mrs. Winters said, following her gaze. His father nearly lost it to drink and poor decisions. Ethan built it back up, acre by acre, head of cattle by head of cattle. He seems honorable, Prudence said carefully. Most honorable man I know, the housekeeper confirmed. Which is why folks were surprised when he brought you home last night. Prudence felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's not what people might think. Oh, I know that and you know that, but this is a small community with big opinions. Mrs. Winters handed Emma back. Don't you worry, though. Ethan doesn't give two figs what people think, never has. That afternoon, Prudence began earning her keep. She mended a stack of shirts with torn seams and patched elbows, kneaded bread dough under Mrs. Winter's approving eye, and even managed to organize the chaotic pile of receipts and ledgers Ethan kept in a desk drawer. Man can run a cattle drive without a single mishap, but can't keep his accounts straight to save his life, Mrs. Winters chuckled. When the ranch hands came in for the midday meal, Prudence felt their curious stares but kept her head high as she helped serve the food. Most were polite if reserved, touching the brims of their hats when introduced. Emma, seated in a wooden high chair Mrs. Winters had unearthed from the attic, became the center of attention, cooing and smiling at the rough men who made silly faces at her. Ethan came in last, bringing the scent of horses and open air with him. His eyes found Prudence immediately. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly as she handed him a plate. "Yes, everyone has been very kind." He nodded once, satisfied, then joined his men at the table. Prudence noticed how the ranch hands deferred to him without subservience, a natural respect for a man who clearly worked as hard as they did. Days turned into weeks, as October gave way to November. Prudence settled into life at the Rocking G, finding unexpected satisfaction in the rhythms of ranch life. She took over more cooking duties as Mrs. Winters taught her to prepare hearty meals that would satisfy hardworking men. She organized Ethan's accounts, discovering that the ranch was more prosperous than its simple appearance suggested. And each night, she fell into bed exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt since her teaching days. Emma thrived in the fresh air and attention. The baby began pulling herself up to stand, much to the delight of the ranch hands who cheered her wobbly efforts. Even Scout, the border collie, appointed himself her guardian, sleeping outside her door at night and alerting Prudence when Emma woke from her naps. And then there was Ethan. He remained polite but distant, often coming in late for meals and leaving early in the mornings. Yet Prudence would sometimes catch him watching her with an unreadable expression, or find that he'd brought in extra firewood for her room, or left a book he thought she might enjoy on the kitchen table. "He's shy around women," Mrs. Winters explained one evening as they prepared supper. "Always has been. His mother died when he was 12 and he grew up in a man's world. He's been nothing but kind," Prudence said, slicing bread. "I owe him so much." "You've more than earned your keep," Mrs. Winters countered. "Haven't seen the books this organized in years," and the men stopped complaining about holes in their socks. The first snow came in late November, transforming the landscape into a pristine white wonderland that took Prudence's breath away. Emma squealed with delight at the sight, reaching pudgy hands toward the window. "First snow's always the prettiest," Ethan said, surprising Prudence as he appeared in the doorway of the sitting room. He'd been gone for 3 days, riding the boundaries of his property to check for strays before winter set in fully. "It's beautiful," Prudence agreed, turning to face him. She was struck, as always, by his quiet strength, the breadth of his shoulders, the clear blue of his eyes, the careful way he held himself around her, as if afraid to intrude. "Brought something for Emma," he said, producing a small wooden horse from his pocket. "Carved it while I was riding." Not much else to do during the long evenings. Prudence took the toy, admiring the careful detail, the flowing mane, the graceful legs. "It's wonderful, thank you." Emma reached for it eagerly, and Ethan smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his face, easing the usual seriousness. "She's growing fast," he observed. "Too fast," Prudence agreed. "She'll be walking before we know it." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by Emma's happy babbling as she examined her new toy. Outside, the snow continued to fall, insulating them from the world beyond the ranch. "Mrs. Winters said you might want to go into town tomorrow," Ethan finally said. "I need to pick up some supplies anyway. You're welcome to ride along." Prudence had been hoping for just such an opportunity. Emma needed warmer clothes for the winter, and though Ethan paid her fairly for her work, she'd been reluctant to ask for a special trip just for her needs. "That would be wonderful," she said. "Thank you." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Ethan had the wagon ready early, with hot bricks wrapped in blankets to keep their feet warm during the journey. Mrs. Winters fussed over Emma, bundling her in extra blankets until only her bright eyes and button nose were visible. "Don't you worry about a thing here," the housekeeper assured them. "Sam and I can handle whatever comes up." Sam Kelly was Ethan's foreman, a taciturn man in his 40s who rarely spoke but watched everything with shrewd eyes. He nodded at Ethan. Weather should hold. "Be back before dark all the same." The ride to town was surprisingly pleasant. Ethan pointed out landmarks along the way, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, the creek that fed the ranch's water supply, the place where he'd once found an arrowhead as a boy. Prudence found herself relaxing in his company, laughing at his dry observations about his neighbors and the antics of young calves in spring. Silver Falls looked different in daylight than it had the evening of her arrival. The main street boasted a general store, the Silver Spur Hotel, a small bank, the saloon she'd glimpsed before, and a millinery shop. A modest church stood at one end of the street and a schoolhouse at the other. "Not much compared to Boston," Ethan said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. "It's charming," Prudence replied honestly, "and peaceful." Inside the store, Prudence selected warm flannel for new clothes for Emma and thread to mend her own dresses. She hesitated over a bolt of pretty blue calico, touching it longingly before moving on. Ethan, settling his accounts with the proprietor, noticed. "Add the blue calico to my order, Walter," he said quietly. 5 yards. "Ethan, no," Prudence protested when she realized what he'd done. "That's too much. Christmas is coming," he said simply. "Consider it an early gift." Before she could argue further, the door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and 3 women who stopped short at the sight of Prudence. Their curious gazes moved from her to Ethan and back again. "Mr. Garrett," the eldest of them said, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an impressive hat. "How nice to see you in town." "Mrs. Hollister," Ethan replied, tipping his hat. "Ladies, and this must be." Mrs. Hollister let the question hang in the air, her eyes sharp. "Miss Prudence Davis," Ethan said, "and her daughter Emma, they're staying at the ranch." "How? Interesting," Mrs. Hollister replied. "We had heard, of course, but one never knows what to believe." Prudence felt heat rise to her cheeks but forced herself to meet the woman's gaze steadily. "Mr. Garrett has been kind enough to provide employment when I found myself in difficult circumstances." "Yes, we heard about that too. Jenkins was always unreliable," Mrs. Hollister sniffed. "Still, it's unusual for a single woman to live at a bachelor's ranch, no matter how many employees are present." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Winters serves as chaperone, Mrs. Hollister. Everything is entirely proper." Of course," the woman said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Will you be staying long, Miss Davis?" "I haven't decided," Prudence answered, surprised to realize it was true. She hadn't thought beyond surviving the winter. "Well, if you're interested in more suitable employment, the school board is desperately seeking a teacher. Our last one left to get married in October." Prudence's heart leapt. Teaching was what she knew, what she loved. "I was a teacher in Boston," she said before she could stop herself. Mrs. Hollister's eyebrows rose. "Were you indeed? Well, the position pays $30 a month plus room and board at the teacherage behind the school. Nothing fancy but respectable. You should consider it." With that, the women moved deeper into the store, heads bent together in whispered conversation. Prudence stood frozen, mind racing. A teaching position, independence, respectability, everything she'd lost when James died. Ethan was silent as he helped her into the wagon, his expression unreadable. They were halfway back to the ranch before he spoke. "You should take it," he said finally. "The teaching position." Prudence looked at him in surprise. "I didn't say you didn't have to. I saw your face." He kept his eyes on the road. "It's what you trained for, isn't it? What you love?" "Yes, but the teacherage is small but solid. Town council fixed it up last summer. You and Emma would be comfortable there." "Are you trying to be rid of us, Mr. Garrett?" Prudence asked, hurt despite herself. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "No, but I'm not selfish enough to keep you at the ranch when you could have your profession back, your independence." "And if I'm not ready for independence," the words slipped out before she could stop them. Ethan glanced at her then, a long look that made her heart beat faster. The rocking G will always be there for you and Emma, no matter what you decide. That night, after Emma was asleep, Prudence sat by her bedroom window staring out at the moonlit landscape. Snow blanketed everything, pristine and peaceful, so different from Boston's grimy winter slush. In just 2 months, this place had begun to feel like home in a way she hadn't experienced since before James fell ill, but Mrs. Hollister's words echoed in her mind. It was unusual, a single woman living at a bachelor's ranch. People talked, and while Prudence had never cared overmuch for gossip, she did care about Ethan's reputation. He'd been nothing but honorable, yet her presence cast a shadow on that honor, and then there was Emma to consider. Her daughter deserved stability, respectability. A mother with her own income and profession, not dependent on a man's charity, no matter how generously given. The teaching position would solve everything. She could support herself and Emma, maintain her dignity, and stop imposing on Ethan's kindness. It was the sensible choice. Why then did the thought of leaving the rocking G fill her with such sadness? The next morning, Prudence found Ethan in the barn, repairing a saddle. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his features. "Emma still sleeping?" he asked. "Mrs. Winters is watching her." Prudence took a deep breath. "I wanted to talk to you about the teaching position." Ethan set down his tools, giving her his full attention. "You've decided." "I think I should at least inquire about it," she said carefully. "As you said, it's my profession, and it would be more proper." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, disappointment. Relief. She couldn't tell. "I'll take you to see the school board next week," he said, his voice neutral. "Or sooner if you prefer." "After Christmas," Prudence suggested. "There's no rush with the school closed for the holiday." Ethan nodded, then hesitated. "Prudence, you know you're welcome here for as long as you want to stay, you and Emma both." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "I know, and we're grateful, more than I can say." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. Finally, Ethan picked up his tools again. Better finish this before the men need it. Prudence recognized the dismissal and turned to leave, but at the barn door she paused. "Ethan," he looked up, "thank you for everything." His expression softened. "You don't need to thank me for basic decency, Prudence." "In my experience," she replied quietly, "decency is rare enough to merit gratitude." The days leading up to Christmas passed in a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Winters enlisted Prudence's help in baking dozens of cookies and pies, making plum pudding, and decorating the ranch house with pine boughs and red ribbons. Emma watched the proceedings with wide-eyed wonder, especially when Ethan and 2 ranch hands dragged in a large pine tree and set it up in the sitting room. "Never seen a Christmas tree before, little one?" Ethan asked, lifting Emma up to touch a branch. She giggled, patting the needles with fascination. "She was too young last Christmas," Prudence explained, "and we didn't have much celebration anyway with James so recently gone." Ethan's expression grew serious. "This year will be different," he promised. "Rocking G Christmas is something special." He was right. On Christmas Eve, the ranch hands gathered in the main house for a feast unlike anything Prudence had seen since leaving Boston. Mrs. Winters had outdone herself, with Prudence's help, preparing a roast goose, 2 hams, mountains of potatoes, fresh bread, 3 kinds of pie, and the plum pudding, which was ceremoniously lit on fire to everyone's delight. After dinner, to Prudence's surprise, several of the men produced instruments: a fiddle, a harmonica, even a small accordion. They played carols while everyone sang, even taciturn Sam joining in with a surprisingly rich baritone. Emma was passed from lap to lap, the center of attention in the pretty new dress Prudence had made from flannel purchased in town. When the baby finally fell asleep, exhausted from the excitement, Prudence excused herself to put her to bed. When she returned downstairs, the party had moved to the porch despite the cold, the men smoking and telling stories under the stars. Only Ethan remained inside, adding logs to the fire. "She go down all right?" he asked. Prudence nodded. "Out like a light, too much excitement." Ethan smiled, and Prudence was struck again by how it transformed his face, softening the usual reserve. "I have something for you," he said. "For Christmas." "Oh, but I didn't," Prudence began, flustered. "You've given plenty," Ethan interrupted. "More than you know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's nothing fancy." Prudence unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a locket silver, intricately engraved with a floral pattern. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Open it," Ethan urged. Inside, Ethan had somehow secured a tiny sketch of Emma, her baby face captured with remarkable accuracy. "How did you?" "Walter's wife at the store does miniatures," Ethan explained. "I described Emma to her. She's good, isn't she?" Tears pricked Prudence's eyes. "It's perfect, thank you." On impulse, she reached up and kissed his cheek, then drew back, embarrassed by her boldness. Ethan touched the spot where her lips had been, looking stunned. "Merry Christmas, Prudence," he said softly. The ranch hands came in then, bringing their boisterous energy with them, and the moment passed. But later, as Prudence lay in bed with the locket clutched in her hand, she wondered at the leap her heart had taken when she'd kissed him, and at the look in his eyes afterward. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, with fresh snow sparkling in the sunlight. Ethan surprised everyone by announcing that, tradition be damned, no work would be done that day except feeding the animals. Instead, he produced a large sleigh from the back barn, hitched up 2 of his best horses, and invited everyone for a ride across the snow-covered meadows. Prudence, bundled up with Emma on her lap, couldn't remember when she'd last laughed so much. The sleigh sped across the pristine snow, bells jingling, while the ranch hands sang carols and told increasingly outlandish stories about Christmases past. Even Mrs. Winters joined in, her cheeks pink with cold and merriment. Ethan sat beside Prudence, occasionally putting an arm around her shoulders to steady her when the sleigh hit a bump. Each time, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with her heavy coat and everything to do with his proximity. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said quietly as they crested a hill that offered a panoramic view of the ranch and the mountains beyond. "The most beautiful place I've ever seen," Prudence agreed honestly. Ethan's eyes stayed on her face rather than the view. "Yes," he said, "beautiful." New Year's came and went, and January settled in with bitter cold and howling winds that kept everyone close to the ranch house. Prudence used the time to begin teaching Emma simple words and songs, delighting in the baby's quick mind. She also continued organizing Ethan's accounts, discovering in the process that he regularly sent money to his sister in Denver and to a home for orphan children in Cheyenne. "You never mentioned this," she said one evening, showing him the ledger entries. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with her discovery. "No reason to talk about it. It's generous," Prudence pressed. "Most men would keep their profits for themselves." "Money's just a tool," Ethan said. "Only matters what you build with it." Each day that passed made the prospect of leaving for the teaching position more difficult to contemplate. Prudence told herself she was just waiting for better weather, for the school term to begin. But in truth, she was finding excuses to stay at the Rocking G, where Emma was thriving and where she herself felt more at home than she had in years. And then there was Ethan. Their easy friendship had deepened over the winter months, built on shared meals, quiet evenings by the fire, and countless small kindnesses exchanged. She'd come to anticipate the sound of his boots on the porch, the way he always asked about her day, how he'd sometimes read aloud from one of his books while she mended by lamplight. It wasn't until early February, when Mrs. Winters fell ill with a fever, that Prudence was forced to acknowledge the depth of her feelings. The housekeeper's illness progressed rapidly, frightening in its intensity. Ethan rode for the doctor immediately, battling through a snowstorm to reach town. Left alone to care for both Emma and Mrs. Winters, Prudence worked tirelessly, applying cold compresses, preparing broth, and praying fervently for the older woman's recovery. When Ethan returned with the doctor 12 hours later, both men covered in snow and exhaustion, Prudence felt such relief at the sight of him that her knees nearly buckled. "How is she?" Ethan asked, stripping off his frozen coat. "Fever's still high," Prudence reported. "But she's taking water now." The doctor, a gruff man named Peterson, examined Mrs. Winters thoroughly before pronouncing it a severe case of influenza but not pneumonia. "Keep doing what you're doing," he told Prudence. "Fluids, cool compresses, watch for any difficulty breathing." After he left, Prudence insisted Ethan rest while she continued tending to Mrs. Winters. "You'll be no good to anyone if you collapse," she said firmly. To her surprise, he acquiesced without argument, falling asleep in a chair by Mrs. Winters' bed. Prudence covered him with a blanket, allowing herself a moment to study his face in repose. The usual lines of responsibility were smoothed away, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. It was then, watching him sleep after his heroic ride through the storm, that Prudence finally admitted to herself what she'd been denying for weeks. She was falling in love with Ethan Garrett. The realization should have terrified her. After James died, she'd vowed never to risk her heart again. After Harold's betrayal, she'd sworn off trusting men entirely. Yet here she was, caring deeply for a man who had never asked anything of her except honest work. Mrs. Winters improved steadily over the next few days, thanks to Prudence's diligent care. By the end of the week, she was sitting up in bed, insisting she could return to her duties. "Absolutely not," Prudence told her firmly. "Another week of rest, at least." "The girl's right, Martha," Ethan added from the doorway. "Ranch won't fall apart without you for a few more days." Mrs. Winters huffed but settled back against her pillows. "Fine, but only because you two seem to be managing so well together." Something in her tone made Prudence glance up sharply, but the housekeeper's expression was innocent. Later that day, Ethan found Prudence in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. "Everything all right?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Fine," Prudence answered too quickly. "Just thinking." "About the teaching position." Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. Prudence's hands stilled in the dough. "Actually, no, I've been so focused on Mrs. Winters I haven't thought about it in days. School board's getting anxious for an answer," Ethan said. "Mrs. Hollister mentioned it when I was in town for the doctor." "Oh." Prudence resumed kneading, not meeting his eyes. "I suppose I should give them one." Ethan was silent for so long that she finally looked up. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "What do you want, Prudence?" he asked finally. "Not what you think you should do. What do you want?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. I don't know. Yes, you do," Ethan said quietly. "You're just afraid to say it." He was right, of course. She knew exactly what she wanted to stay at the Rocking G, to watch Emma grow up in this beautiful, wild place, to be near Ethan every day. But wanting wasn't having, and she'd learned the hard way that hoping for too much only led to disappointment. "The teaching position makes sense," she said finally. "It's respectable, independent." "And is that what you want, independence?" Ethan took a step closer. "Or is it just what you think you deserve?" Prudence stared at him, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ethan said, his voice low and intense, "that maybe you've convinced yourself you need to be alone, that depending on anyone is a weakness, that you don't deserve more. That's not, isn't it?" Ethan was directly across the table from her now. "You work harder than anyone I know. You care for Emma, for Mrs. Winters, for everyone on this ranch. You never ask for anything for yourself. It's like you're punishing yourself for something." Tears stung Prudence's eyes. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," Ethan said gently. "Tell me what you're so afraid of." "The dam broke. I'm afraid of making another mistake," Prudence cried. "I married James because I loved him, and he died and left me alone with a baby. I agreed to marry Harold because he promised security, and he abandoned me before we even met. Every decision I've made has led to more pain. So yes, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of trusting my own judgment. I'm afraid of risking Emma's future on my foolish heart." Ethan came around the table then, and to her shock, took her flower-covered hands in his. "Prudence Davis, there is nothing foolish about your heart. It's the bravest, strongest heart I know." She stared at him, tears blurring her vision. "Ethan, let me finish," he said. "I've been trying to find the right words for weeks now. I'm not good at this, but you deserve to hear it." He took a deep breath. "I don't want you to take that teaching position. I want you to stay here at the Rocking G, not as my employee, as my wife," Prudence gasped. "Your wife, but you said—" "I said I wasn't looking for a wife when you first arrived," Ethan confirmed. "And I wasn't, but then I got to know you. I saw how you care for Emma, how hard you work, how you face each day with courage despite everything you've been through. I watched you make this house a home again, and somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Prudence couldn't speak, couldn't think. Ethan Garrett, steady, honorable, kind Ethan, was offering her everything she secretly wanted but had been afraid to hope for. "You don't have to answer now," he continued when she remained silent. "Take all the time you need, the offer stands no matter what. And if your answer is no, you still have a place here for as long as you want it. Nothing changes." But everything had already changed. In the span of a few minutes, the future Prudence had been carefully planning the teaching position. The small teacherage, the independent life had been replaced by a new possibility. A life at the Rocking G, not as an employee but as its mistress. A partnership with a man she'd come to respect and, yes, to love. "Emma," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "What about Emma?" Ethan's face softened. "I told you the day we met, I'll take you both as my own. Emma is part of the package, Prudence. A part I've grown to love as much as her mother." That was what broke her. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over and she pulled her hands from his to cover her face. "Prudence," Ethan's voice was uncertain now, "I've upset you." "I'm sorry, no," she managed, lowering her hands to reveal a tremulous smile. "No, you haven't upset me, you've offered me everything I didn't dare hope for." Hope dawned in Ethan's eyes. "Is that a yes?" Prudence nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Ethan's face broke into the most radiant smile she'd ever seen, and then his arms were around her, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that left flower handprints all over his shirt. "I love you," she whispered when he set her down. "I think I have for weeks now." Ethan framed her face with his hands, his expression serious despite his smile. "I promise you won't regret this. I'll spend every day making sure of it." Then he kissed her, a gentle kiss that deepened when she responded, her arms twining around his neck. It was a kiss of promise, of future, of home found after long wandering. They broke apart at the sound of a throat clearing. Mrs. Winters stood in the doorway, Emma on her hip, both of them watching with undisguised delight. "About time," the housekeeper said, bouncing Emma. "Isn't it, little one? About time indeed." News of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Falls. To Prudence's surprise, most reactions were positive. Even Mrs. Hollister, disappointed about losing a potential teacher, admitted that Ethan Garrett needed a good woman to civilize him properly. They were married on a bright April morning, with wildflowers just beginning to dot the meadows around the ranch. The ceremony was held in the Silver Falls Church, with Emma trotting down the aisle ahead of Prudence, scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Mrs. Winters wept openly, while Sam Kelly stood proudly as Ethan's best man. Ethan had insisted on a proper wedding ring, ordering it special from Denver, a gold band set with small diamonds that caught the light as Prudence moved her hand. "Too fancy for a ranch wife?" he'd asked anxiously when he showed it to her. "Perfect for this ranch wife," she'd assured him. Their honeymoon was simple 3 days at a hotel in Cheyenne while Mrs. Winters looked after Emma. It was the first time they'd been truly alone together, and Prudence discovered yet another side to her new husband. Ethan the lover was as generous and attentive as Ethan the rancher was capable and strong. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed one night, holding her close in the hotel bed. "After my father died, the ranch became everything. I didn't think there was room for more. And now?" Prudence asked, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. "Now I can't imagine life without you and Emma," he said simply. "You've given the ranch meaning beyond just work." When they returned to the Rocking G, Emma greeted them with squeals of delight, running on sturdy legs to be swept up into Ethan's arms. "Papa," she cried, a new word that brought tears to Ethan's eyes. "That's right, little one," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your papa now." Life settled into new rhythms. Prudence took over running the household fully, freeing Mrs. Winters for the cooking she preferred. The kitchen garden was expanded, with Prudence planting rows of vegetables and herbs that would feed them through the next winter. Ethan built a small corral near the house where Emma could safely watch the horses. Perched on his shoulders or in Prudence's arms in June, Ethan's sister Clara visited from Denver with her husband and son. Emma, delighted with her 7-year-old cousin, followed him everywhere. "She'll need siblings," Clara observed as they watched the children play. Soon, I hope, Prudence blushed but shared a secret smile with Ethan. They had been trying, though they hadn't told anyone yet. By August, there was no hiding the news. Prudence's dresses needed letting out, and her morning sickness, though mild, was noticeable to Mrs. Winter's sharp eyes. February baby, the housekeeper predicted after Prudence finally confirmed her suspicions. Perfect timing. Ranch is quiet then. Ethan was both thrilled and terrified at the prospect of fatherhood. He read every book on child rearing he could find, ordered a cradle to be built by the town's best carpenter, and insisted Prudence rest more despite her protests that pregnancy wasn't an illness. "I carried Emma while teaching 30 students," she reminded him. "I'm perfectly capable of normal activities. Humor me," Ethan would say, pulling her feet into his lap to rub them in the evenings. "I missed taking care of you the first time." As her belly grew, so did Emma's excitement about the baby in Mama's tummy. The little girl, now nearly 2, would pat Prudence's stomach and sing to her unborn sibling, a sight that never failed to melt Ethan's heart. Christmas came again, this time with Prudence as mistress of the rocking G rather than its guest. The celebration was even more joyous than the previous year, with Emma old enough to fully appreciate the decorated tree and presents. Ethan's gift to Prudence was a rocking chair, handcrafted by a furniture maker in Cheyenne. "For when the baby comes," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth wood. "I noticed you missed the one your mother had." Tears filled her eyes. Pregnancy had made her more emotional than usual. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it once," Ethan said, pleased by her reaction. "Last spring when we were talking about what you'd left behind in Boston. You remembered such a small detail." Ethan knelt beside the chair, taking her hands. "I remember everything you tell me, Prudence. Every hope, every fear, every dream. That's what love is." In late January, heavy snows isolated the ranch for nearly 2 weeks. Ethan grew increasingly anxious as Prudence's due date approached, fearing the doctor wouldn't be able to reach them in time. "Babies have been born without doctors for thousands of years," Mrs. Winters assured him. "And I've delivered my share. Stop worrying yourself sick." But Ethan's worry proved justified when Prudence went into labor during a particularly fierce blizzard in early February. The contractions began at dawn, intensifying rapidly. "Too fast," Mrs. Winters muttered, setting water to boil and gathering clean linens. First babies usually take their time. By noon, Prudence was deep in the throes of labor, gripping Ethan's hand with surprising strength as each contraction washed over her. He stayed by her side, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement, his face pale with concern. "I can't lose you," he whispered when Mrs. Winters stepped out briefly. "I can't, Prudence." Despite her pain, Prudence understood his fear. His mother had died in childbirth. "You won't," she promised between breaths. "We'll be fine, all of us." The labor lasted into the evening, Prudence's strength flagging as the hours passed. Ethan never left her side, not even when Mrs. Winters suggested he wait downstairs. "My place is here," he said firmly. Just as the last light faded from the winter sky, Prudence gave one final, tremendous push, and their son slid into Mrs. Winters' waiting hands. His lusty cry filled the room, strong and indignant at being thrust into the cold world. A boy. Mrs. Winters announced, quickly wrapping the infant in a warm blanket, and a fine one at that. Ethan stared in wonder as the housekeeper placed the tiny bundle in Prudence's arms. "He's perfect," he whispered, counting fingers and toes with reverent care, "just like his mother." Prudence looked up at him, exhausted but radiant. "What shall we call him?" They discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at his son's face so small yet so determined, Ethan knew. "James," he said. "James Ethan Garrett." Tears filled Prudence's eyes. "After my first husband." Ethan nodded. "He gave you Emma. He deserves to be remembered." In that moment, Prudence's heart overflowed with love for this man who had taken her and Emma as his own, who had given her a home and security when she needed it most, and who now honored the memory of her past even as they built their future together. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love you," Ethan replied, sealing the promise with a kiss as their newborn son squirmed between them. Spring arrived early that year, as if eager to celebrate the newest addition to the rocking G. The meadows exploded with wildflowers, and Ethan built a special wagon with a canopy so Prudence could take both children on picnics while he worked with the cattle. Emma, now a proud big sister, took her responsibilities seriously. "My baby," she would declare to visitors, standing protectively beside James's cradle. By summer, Prudence had fully regained her strength and then some. She took on new projects around the ranch, expanding the garden again, starting a small orchard, even beginning to teach Emma her letters though the girl was barely 2.5. "She has her mother's intelligence," Ethan observed proudly as Emma carefully traced Anna in the dust of the porch. "And her father's determination," Prudence added, for Emma had indeed begun calling Ethan Papa exclusively, the memory of her birth father fading as naturally as winter gives way to spring. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, James sleeping in Prudence's arms and Emma playing with Scout nearby, Ethan took his wife's free hand. "Happy?" he asked simply. Prudence looked around at the home they'd built together, not just the physical structure of the ranch house, but the family they'd created from fragments of broken dreams and renewed hope. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand. "Do you ever think about that day, when you arrived in Silver Falls and Jenkins wasn't there?" "Sometimes," Prudence admitted. "It seemed like the worst day of my life at the time." And now, she leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had become her foundation. "Now I know it was the best, the day my real life began." As if in agreement, James stirred and opened his eyes, Ethan's eyes, clear and blue regarding his parents with solemn curiosity before breaking into a toothless smile that melted their hearts anew. "Mama, Papa, look." Emma called, pointing to the first star appearing in the twilight sky. "Make a wish," Ethan pulled Prudence closer, his arm warm around her shoulders. "No need," he said softly. "I already have everything I could ever wish for." And as night settled over the rocking G Ranch, bringing with it the peaceful sounds of home and family, Prudence Davis Garrett knew with absolute certainty that she did too.